Our next speaker is an executive trainer, coach, and TEDx speaker who has helped leaders build emotional intelligence, communication, and executive presence. He empowers professionals to grow, to lead confidently, and to boost performance. He is known for his media insight and conference talks. Derek supports lasting impact in organizations and individuals. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make welcome all the way from Kenya, Derek Bbanga.
Brittany, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Wonderful introduction. This is such an
Thank you.
awesome time that I'm having, and I'm glad to be able to contribute to this. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a something called resilience, and tied to the theme of this conference, the animal that I have selected is the wildebeest. Now, ladies and gentlemen, wildebeest do not get ulcers. This is a scientific fact. You know, when I was a young man, I remember we would take holidays with my dad, and we went to the national park one day, and I saw not a wildebeest, but an antelope giving birth. And this antelope gave birth right in front of us, and the little antelope that came out got on its little spindly legs and immediately began running. In fact, it took off. And as a young man, I asked my dad, how is this even possible? And he said, well, these calves are actually born ready to run, ready to face the world, ready to face the world and its challenges. And I was reminded of that story as I was preparing for today's talk, where the animal kingdom, particularly animals like the antelope or the wildebeest, you can throw in, maybe animals like the zebra there, really operate in an environment where there is a lot of pressure. I mean, look at the life of a wildebeest. Now, again, can we put ourselves in the hooves of a wildebeest? But I imagine the life of a wildebeest wakes up in the morning, walks out onto the African plain and wants to have its breakfast. So it starts eating that dewy grass. Now, as it's having its meal, there is another animal, a predator, that's also looking for its breakfast. So that lion or leopard or cheetah, that predator, charges out of the bush. And that wildebeest, for the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, is under the most intensive pressure. It is literally running for its life. But you know what is interesting? Imagine that this predator gets this wildebeest's cousin, right? The wildebeest goes back to having its meal, rudely interrupted, might I add, and completely forgets that seconds ago you were running for your life. Now, imagine the wildebeest had 3 square meals a day. Again, I'm just using this scenario in terms of putting it into the context of us as human beings. So you have breakfast, you've got to run for your life, and then you come back, resume your meal. You're having your lunch. Again, you've got to take off, run for your life, and hopefully if you survive, you come back, resume your meal, and that same scenario plays out for dinner. Now, imagine if we were in the hooves, as I alluded to earlier, of the wildebeest. I mean, how long before we said, this is not for us, and decided to check out? I doubt it even last a day. But this extreme resilience, if you will, this innate system that the wildebeest possesses, not to be looking over his shoulder, not to go to bed at night and start ruminating about tomorrow's meal and how it's going to have to run away or what happened earlier in the day, is, I think, a fantastic lesson that we can learn as speakers. I mean, as a speaker, look at what we go through: imposter syndrome, pressures, judgment. Oh my goodness. In fact, that list is endless. Just preparing for this in a room with incredible speakers as part of this Voices into Africa. Last night, I was, up half the night Hope I'll be able to make a good impression and all of that. But there is something that we can pick up or learn from the wildebeest. In fact, I'm going to share something else with you. Google set out on a quest to build a perfect team. What are the ingredients to the perfect team? What are the components of, say, the people that would lead to making the perfect team? And do you know what the number one thing was? The number one thing, ladies and gentlemen, was psychological safety. There you have it, psychological safety, which is an environment where it is okay for interpersonal risk without the fear of punishment or humiliation. Think about that. As a speaker, that is our foundation. We want to be able to come up here and, God forbid, if something happens, my lights fail, my camera falls, something in the picture over there, you know, where I am sort of in an environment amongst this group of supportive speakers where I will not be judged too harshly. In fact, sometimes I ask myself, has there ever been a headline where somebody gave a speech or a keynote or or delivered some sort of a message in a public forum, and they were prosecuted for that? They were hanged. They were sent to jail. Has that ever happened? I don't think so. So coming back to the wildebeest, this psychological safety actually works for the wildebeest. They have to do the Great Migration and cross the river. Now imagine, we all know that scenario. Right? We've seen it countless times, right? The wildebeest are waiting at the edge of the bank of the river, waiting for one of them to cross. Now, psychological safety is at play here because nobody's being judged for not being the first one to cross. They're all sort of there assessing the situation, what's going on, you know, is this a safe time to cross? Are the crocodiles going to get me? And even when that first one crosses, it is not judged too harshly. Now, listen, we don't know what's going to happen, but if that wildebeest makes it across, it is not ostracized for being the first animal to cross. So it's an open assessment of the situation. That's one of the ways that psychological safety is built by the wilderness and the herd. And as I said before, no punishment for being cautious or even for being the first person to take the courage to cross that riverbank, and the rest follow. So in terms of us as speakers, it's about creating this foundation for us as speakers. Environments like this, the wonderful work that Charlotte is doing and Bruce and everybody else who are really creating this environment to support us as speakers so that we can come and showcase at occasions like this. And by the way, this foundation leads to resilient behaviors or actions. We can lean into difficult conversations, even with different audiences. We're not afraid to take tough questions. And yes, if we do forget something, we have also created an internal psychological safety where we don't judge ourselves too harshly or we don't beat ourselves up. I was literally having a talk, giving a talk a couple of days ago, and something that I wanted to do to engage the audience, and we didn't have time, and I ended up sort of beating myself up on the flight home, but I sort of need to take my own advice. And then ultimately, the result is we can go into these spaces and we can give these talks and we can speak to new audiences and we can speak on different topics. And we create this sort of holistic cycle, if you will. Now, this is a slide that I have borrowed from one of my keynotes, and I use it when I'm making the case for organizational culture. And I don't know if you guys can read that. Maybe let me make it a little bit bigger. Here we go. So culture is how employees' hearts and stomachs feel about Monday morning on a Sunday night. And it's not my quote, but you know, when I have this conversation with teams and when I'm working with different departments or organizations, we, you know, go into an interesting conversation about this. But as a speaker, what culture are we creating where our hearts and stomachs feel great about going in to give a keynote tomorrow, Monday, Saturday, or as I've indicated here, as going into any audience and looking at them as a room of friends? What is this culture that we are creating for us as speakers and to grow this business, particularly here in Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave that with you as my parting shot. Are we creating a culture where our hearts and stomachs feel great about any audience, any environment, any people that we're going to talk to? Thank you very much.